Alright, it's about time that Blizzard has come in with some tank nerfs and some class tuning. This is going to be going live next week, or tomorrow, I guess, at the time of recording this video. So, Blizzard has announced today that there are upcoming Dragonflight class tuning. Regarding a handful of classes, the main ones that I'm going to be covering, though, are going to be the tank specs, and mostly regarding PvE. You know, there's some touches to other abilities, like Assassination Rogue got a small buff, Affliction Lock got a small buff, but that's not really what I'm interested in. Currently, the tanking meta for Mythic Plus is predominantly purple. Pretty much, if you're not a purple tank, you're going to have a very hard time pugging keys because everyone believes that Demon Hunter is the best, which is pretty much true. They're the only tank that can really completely control a dungeon and the way that mobs interact with your group. So it's no surprise that Blizzard has finally pulled the trigger on this. So let's quickly go over the changes and just my general opinion about it. So first things first, we have to talk about the Vengeance nerfs. There are four major nerfs coming in here. Three of them are applying to basically the crowd control ability of Demon Hunter, and some of it's affecting damage a little bit, and then we have just a flat soul cleave nerf. So let's quickly go through these. So Sigil of Silence duration is being reduced by 20% by essentially 1 second. It was 5, now it's going to be 4. And Sigil of Silence also now has an increased cooldown by 50%, which is pretty massive. So it's going from 60-second cooldown to 90-second cooldown. Now, of course, Cycle of Binding does still exist in the game, so you are getting consistent cooldown reduction, but there was also a slight nerf to Cycle of Binding, the talent in the Vengeance tree. So this is now going to reduce sigils by 2 seconds per trigger instead of 3 seconds. So generally, overall, you're going to be getting much less usages of your Sigil of Silence, and because you're getting less uses of your Sigil of Silence, you're going to get less uses of your other sigils by a handful of seconds per minute. This is a pretty major nerf, but I don't think it's as impactful as I think a lot of players are making it out to be, and I'm going to get into that in a second. The last nerf that we are seeing is just a Soul Cleave nerf by 8%. This is to help pull in line their single target damage while also maintaining high AoE. This is kind of fine. A lot of the damage comes from Sigil of Flame anyways, and arguably Spirit Bomb in some situations. So this isn't that big of a hit. Okay, but let's talk about... I kind of want to rant a little bit about Demon Hunter, so I apologize for wherever this may lead. So it's been apparent since pretty much the Vengeance Demon Hunter rework back in Season 3 that it's been a powerhouse tank. It dominated all of Season 3. It's clearly been even more dominant this season because of increased secondary stats, as well as the luxury of having control in your group. Moving into this season, being able to lock mobs down for upwards of 30 seconds while your DPS just get to zug away without really having to think about anything is obviously incredibly attractive. Not to mention that a wizard cleave meta like we are seeing with things like Balance Druid, Mages, Shadow Priests, and of course augmentation buffing all of those classes up. It's so attractive to just bring a class that can not only keep everything under control, but is also adding 5% damage to your entire group, and on top of that is basically going to be the highest throughput tank in terms of damage. Their self-sustainability is insanely good, and like I just said, their damage is pretty much untouchable by almost any other tank outside of Brewmaster, but there were some nerfs today, which I'll get into shortly. My general opinion on these nerfs is actually I'm pretty disappointed. I thought the reworked Vengeance Demon Hunter going into Season 3 was probably one of the best tank redesigns that we've ever seen, and on top of that, I felt like Blizzard had finally identified something unique to tanking that we've never really had, and that's essentially crowd control. Creating tanks as a support spec makes a ton of sense, and I think it's a very cool playstyle, and I think it's very cool character design or class design. I was hoping that Blizzard wasn't going to really touch Vengeance as much. Obviously it was needed. I'm not arguing that it wasn't needed, but it's unfortunate because what I would like to see instead of Vengeance Demon Hunter getting nerfed is that other tanks have more utility. Now, obviously, this isn't something you can just band-aid fix. You can't just give a bunch of tanks more utility, nor am I arguing for homogenization of the kit across the board for each tank. I'm not asking every tank to have a grip and every tank to have an AoE silence, not every tank to have an AoE stun, but I think there's definitely a lot of things that Blizzard could do going into the War Within with hero talents, with reworks, that could make other tanks just as strong as Vengeance Demon Hunter is now, but give them all niche, kind of nuanced specialties. So I'm pretty sad about these nerfs, but not because it wasn't needed, but because it is pulling back on basically one of the best redesigns of a class that we've ever seen. Vengeance Demon Hunter is insanely fun to play. I really enjoyed in playing it myself. I know a lot of people also are having a great time playing it. It's simple, but it does take a little bit of skill to still play and, survive, especially in higher end content. And there's nothing more satisfying than completely locking down a pack and making sure you're hitting the Sigil of Silence and chaining that into a chains, then hitting with Misery, getting cooldown reduction, hitting them with like Flame, doing big damage, back into a Sigil of Silence. It's such a satisfying kind of feedback loop that you're getting from the class, and pulling back on it, especially in the department of the sigils, makes me a little sad. And it makes me a little bit sad for the future of class design, because it just means that Blizzard kind of wants tanks to be fairly boring. You're getting punched in the face, your damage is going to be, obviously like half of what a DPS can do, and you're just going to bring whatever tank can do the best thing, and that right now is VDH. Will this impact the meta? I don't think it will. Vengeance Demon Hunter is still really strong. Obviously, having less Sigil of Silences and a shorter duration on those and less cooldown reduction is definitely going to nerf their damage when it comes to Sigil Flame. It's definitely going to nerf their capabilities of keeping mobs under control. But honestly, most packs, you don't need this much CC. It's almost overkill. So I think this is actually pulling it in line, if anything. Vengeance will still be meta. Wizard Cleave is still meta, so you're still going to see, obviously, like Chaos Brand being massively beneficial. There's no other tank that's even close to where Vengeance Demon Hunter is performing. I think the average, like in the top 5 percentile, the 95th percentile for all classes in Mythic Plus, Demon Hunters are about 200 IO ahead of every other tank. So this should, I don't even think pull them in line. I think they're still going to be out ahead. It's just unfortunate. It's an unfortunate nerf. I have a lot more to say about this, but I think I'm going to cut it there. Basically, it was needed, but kind of sad about it. And I say that as someone who's not currently playing VDH as a main or even an alt. I'm just strictly kind of sad. I just wish other tanks were a little better. Anyways, let's talk about some of the other tank changes. So a lot of you have been DMing me today, and there's been a shit show on Twitter about the Brewmaster nerfs. So let's talk about these. So the Brewmaster nerfs were needed, but also not needed. So Blizzard has gone ahead and they've hit us with about 5 nerfs here. We have Keg Smash damage being reduced by 10%, Spinning Crane Kick damage also reduced by 10%, and Summon White Tiger Statue damage reduced by 30%. These damage nerfs I don't think were needed. When you look at the average player in terms of damage, Brewmasters were not doing anything significant in terms of damage. They were maybe keeping up with Vengeance Demon Hunter, not given the fact that Demon Hunter also has insane amount of control and self-healing. Brewmaster in very specific scenarios could do a lot of damage if your name was Equinox and you liked to abuse damage trinkets like Storm Eater's Boon. When you look across the board, we're not doing any significant level of damage, and our single target is actually, if anything, low. So nerfing Spinning Crane Kick means that Charred Passions isn't really a viable play in Mythic Plus going forward. Keg Smash damage means we have a little bit of less on-demand snap threat, which is really going to hurt players in the lower bracket because you're not benefiting from big Dragonfire brews. Brewmaster players who are pushing high-end keys have Deep Stagger Dragonfire brews, which is allowing for a lot of snap threat, where when you're reducing our general AoE, you don't have high stagger and you're reducing Spinning Crane Kick damage. There's not really a viable option to have like decent snap threat outside of like Exploding Keg and like Boneless Brew windows. So I'm a little nervous on that end. I mean, these aren't massive nerfs. It's not like you're going to now not have threat anymore, but it does impact the lower end, I believe. And Summon White Tiger Statue being reduced by 30%, you can now make an argument that it's not even worth running as a talent. For people who don't like having the extra keybind, or they don't like putting it down, or they forget to put it down, you can make an argument not to even run this anymore. Should you? Yes, it does a lot of damage still, but the 30% is just massive. So crunching numbers from a lot of my own logs, as well as some other Brewmaster logs, this seems to be in the realm of about a 3% damage nerf in Mythic Plus. It doesn't sound like a lot, but we weren't even ahead of any other tank. So it's a little annoying to have to read these types of nerfs, knowing that, other tanks are performing way better. Anyways, while it does suck getting some nerfs, we did get some buffs. Effectiveness of Stagger against magical attacks is increased by roughly like 18%. So it's going from a 45% reduction or stagger effectiveness to a 55% stagger effectiveness. So overall, this is going to feel a little bit better on fortified weeks. It's going to feel really good against like raid tank busters, generally speaking. And yeah, just fine. It's hard to quantify this number exactly because it depends on the level of key, depends on the affixes, depends on your level, like mitigation that you currently have active, depends on your stagger percentage based off of your main stat. So there's like a lot of different factors that go into this, but generally speaking, good change. And then Healing Sphere increased by 10%. This is it's hard to, it depends on the level of key you're doing, but Healing Sphere, generally speaking, can be anywhere between like 15 to 25% of your healing. So this being buffed by 10% is a welcomed buff to our healing. So overall, doesn't feel justified. It's really funny because if you look at things like Archon GG, the top Brewmaster log is like 30k DPS above the top DH log, but the top Brewmaster log is the only log in existence that is doing that much damage, and it's Equinox, who's running a Storm Eater Boon Trinket, which is already doing so much damage. So they could easily look at this log and be like, okay, this is a one-off, and on top of it being a one-off, he's running a very particular setup for damage, and he's pulling like a lunatic, as he does. And the rest of the players are just in their own little camp. And instead of doing that, instead of being like, oh, maybe we'll nerf the trinket, or maybe like it's a one-off thing and it's just like one player going ham, they're like, nope, we're gonna nerf Brewmaster. So thanks, Equinox. Anyways, we are good there. So let's just talk about Protection Warrior really quick, because I think these changes are pretty interesting. Now there's a developer note here. Our goal of these changes is to reduce Protection Warrior's deaths to dangers that are most likely to kill them, like burst or magic damage. There are some talents that warriors have protection against these threats, like Disrupting Shout, Bolster, and Battle Scarred Veteran, but it can be difficult to find talent points for them. To provide more build flexibility, we are reducing the power of Battering Ram talent and moving its damage and defensive benefits into core abilities. We are also increasing damage across the board and buffing some defensive talent options. So all abilities are increased by 5%, Devastator damage increased by 30, Ignore Pain healing increased by 6, Disrupting Shout's cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds, about 18%. Enduring Alacrity's increased stamina and armor by 10% was 5, and haste by 2 was 1. Battering Ram now increases your auto attack damage and speed by 10% for 20 seconds, was 20%. So basically, Battering Ram, probably not going to be as popular as a play anymore, is what it sounds like, and you're going to this is probably going to free up a point or two to allow you to talent into things like Disrupting Shout, or again, Battle Scarred Veteran. I'm not sure what these changes look like exactly. I haven't really touched my Protection Warrior this season, and I haven't looked too much into how they're performing. All I know is that Brewmaster and Protection Warrior are the least two represented tanks, so I can't imagine they're having as good of a time as VDH is. Overall, I think these are good changes. I think Disrupting Shout having a reduced cooldown gives Protection Warriors a solid choice in an AoE kick. Unlike Sigil of Silence, though, it's not a blanket. It has to be used to kick casts. You have to wait for X amount of casts to be, casting. But generally speaking, I think this is good. So you have a more frequent AoE interrupt. You get a little bit of more Ignore Pain healing, and your Devastator damage, which is basically auto attacks, is going to be increased. And then you just have a flat 5% damage increase across the board. And obviously this is pretty beneficial because this feeds into the fact that warriors typically have baseline 10% leech. So you are going to have more healing, and obviously Ignore Pain being increased as well is good. Enduring Alacrity also having stamina and armor increase is pretty massive now that I think about it. A 10% armor gain over 5% is kind of nuts, and the stamina is going to definitely help you not get one shot by these types of abilities. So overall, Warrior is looking a little bit better. Brewmaster defensively is, but damage-wise isn't, and obviously Vengeance seems like it kind of got clapped, but it's probably still going to be meta. Anyways, those are my thoughts on these changes. I hope that kind of answers people's questions about how I feel about these changes and nerfs. Let me know what you guys think down below. Obviously, a massive shout out to all my Patreon supporters. Without you guys, I wouldn't be able to make content like this. So I hope you're all having a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.